This 10-minute training looks at a residential fire in Berlin Township, Michigan, that happened back in 2016. And one of the things with this that I think is important to note is that both when we look at a video of an incident and also when we're the first resource to arrive and we're looking at incident conditions, that may present a very different picture than what's actually going on, and particularly once we begin tactical operations. So it's important for us to not fixate on that initial set of conditions or your initial plan of action, because that's based on what you see first. And as you improve the accuracy of your situational awareness, you may need to make some adjustments to what it is that's going on. And there were some interesting things in this particular incident. I think some things that some information that was provided to the responding companies that's not immediately apparent in the video, and then there was maybe some other things that they were focused on one thing and there was some other stuff going on. So we'll take a look at it and we'll see what happened. So this house was in a rural area, and unfortunately there's limited pre-incident data because of when aerial photography and when street view was done and so forth. But fortunately, the video gives us a pretty good look at the building. There's a hydrant nearby, as you can see at the corner of Hageman Road and Chester Street, quite close to the building. And then there's one on the opposite side. I think companies actually use both of these hydrants at one point or another in the fire. So this is an aerial view. The gray box represents the fire occupancy. I believe that this aerial photograph was taken after the fire and the building was gone. So there was just a grassy plot there. So this is the street coming down. So it's a little narrow one way road, and as we'll see, the company in the video that's responding into this, they end up going the wrong way down the one way road. But again, not an issue with traffic or anything like that. So the scenario that I gave our guys is that they had very limited staffing. They had a crew of 2 on the first in company and a crew of 3 in the next arriving company, and then the command officer arriving a little bit later. So they really, what they've got to work with is 5 people, but initially it's just a crew of 2. That's actually an error in there. This is not a group home for individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism. I didn't delete that from a prior 10-minute training. So this, let me scroll back up here. Yeah, this happened in the early morning hours. It's light out, but early morning. Again, critical factors to think about during response, obviously, is the fact that it's early morning. People could still be in bed. House probably is going to be occupied in the early morning hours, or high probability it's occupied in the early morning hours. The fact that there's hydrants in the area. And temperature's 26 degrees, so it's cold out. Don't have any wind, appreciable wind to be concerned about. And again, this is a little bit different than some of the others, because there's only 2 people on that first arriving resource. So the conversation isn't about what is the firefighter riding in back going to do. It's about what are the officer and the pump operator going to do. So in this particular case, as always is the discussion with Lars and Ed, is whether or not they're going to lay hose before they pull up in front of this place. The hydrant is pretty close, but again, this is one of these things where it may or may not. If we go back and look at the map, that's pretty close. If push came to shove, the pump operator could likely stretch that supply line back by himself. So we might not need to lay a supply line in unless it was apparent that we had very substantial fire conditions, and that would get us a little bit quicker water on the fire. So we'll take a look at the incident video and then have a look at this photo and see what it is that we think is going on. Let me make sure I keep this up as well. Here.
Would you anticipate that house? Oh, well, we can see the video. We can take that later. So would you, that kind of house, would you anticipate or it being an occupied attic? I mean, there's no windows and so on, so you would assume that that's an unoccupied attic?
Yeah, I would think that was not living space above the first floor, that the attic space might be used for storage, or it may simply be a truss loft, depending on when the house was built.
Yeah. Would it be common in some areas that those attics are secretly modified to become housing?
That's possible. In this case, I'm not sure there's that much space up there. You know, looking at where the ceiling line is and so forth. If the height between the ceiling and the ridge was high enough, that would be a possibility. I mean, I don't know that it can be completely ruled out in any case, but I would not anticipate that in this case. I wouldn't put a high probability on that, unless there were dormers or windows or something like that.
Yeah. Just a curious question, but
okay. So the first thing being the initial radio report, and again the elements that we would have that they're on scene of a small one-story house with a working fire. if we've not laid hose and we were close enough for the apparatus operator to take care of the water supply on his own, we just say we run a hydrant, and then define our initial action plan and our strategy, and whether or not we needed additional resources, and initiate and name command. In this particular incident, it's kind of interesting. The guys that actually responded to this, they took a fairly typical approach of we're going to go through the front door, and there was some delay in them making an opening at the doorway, and so forth. The information that came along with the video said that they were told that the floor was burned through. And again, I don't know, told by who. Did they discover that themselves? That's unknown. But they still seem fixated on that attack position at the front door.
So that's a basement.
No, I don't believe this house had a basement. It just had a crawl space.
So the floor to the crawl space was burnt through?
Well, that's what the information accompanying the video said. And again, I don't know whether that was from maybe a fire that could have started in the crawl space from electrical wiring, or whether it was some other cause. Again, there was not an awful lot of information about, and this is what we found afterwards, and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's pretty rare that the fire would gone down through the crawl space into the crawl space. If the floor is gone, it probably has to start there.
It would have had to burn for a long time in order to do that. And the house was occupied when the fire started. The occupants were there. They were outside. They had self-evacuated. So that sort of makes me wonder about that a little bit, particularly, was it burned through in a large area? Was it a small area that was burned through? That, again, there's no information one way or the other about that.
Well, anyway, I mean, if it's a crawl space, I mean, it's the danger of falling down isn't that bad unless you fall down into an ash pit. That could be not so good. Yeah. It's stepping on an ash pit on a wildland fire. It's not that great.
No, and one of the things as this goes on, it becomes apparent that the bulk of the fire is not at the front door where they are, although there is the house is pretty smoke logged. You can see the windows are dark all the way around, and it's apparent that the fire has extended upward. If it did start in that crawl space, it has extended upward, likely through the interior of the house and into the attic.
What would you anticipate if that was your area? What kind of insulation in the walls would you anticipate?
It would probably be fiberglass insulation.
Yeah.
More than likely, given the age of the house.
So probably it's not going to spread through the insulation that rapidly. I mean, eventually it will go through, but it would crawl through that, because there would be a block down a block. It wouldn't be a balloon frame. It wouldn't be a hollow.
No. This is a relatively new house. This wouldn't be balloon frame. It'd be platform frame. So not likely that it would be going up through the walls, with the exception of possibly a plumbing chases and so forth.
Yeah.
If in a bathroom or a kitchen where you had a vent pipe that goes up through the wall and comes out the roof, that might be a path of travel.
Yeah. But I mean, look at the picture here. I mean, my first priority would be to, given we assume that like you said, the people are out, and in my context, unless you deem the people to be very untrustworthy, I would run that incident as everybody's out, until there's some kind of confirmation or justified belief that there might be someone inside. But we would anticipate that would be empty in that case. And in that case, my first priority would probably be the same if it were occupied anyway, but to establish where the fire is right now. So running around that building looking through windows would be the thermal imager. And it looks to be in the AB corner based on smoke. But it could be those sneaky bastards where you have a little bit of wind and the wind goes up into the attic and pushes all the smoke to the other side of the attic.
Yep.
So it looks like it looks like it's coming from the B side, but it's actually the C side.
Yeah.
Oh, D side. Sorry.
Yeah, as this progresses and we take a little bit further look at it, we'll find that it is on that Bravo side and the like. But I think that my expectation for our folks would be very similar, particularly given that they show up with two people. The windows are still intact. That when they arrive, the apparatus operator would take care of the apparatus and the water supply, and the officer would be doing a 360 reconnaissance with the thermal imager to see if he can determine, or he or she can determine, where exactly the fire is located. And in this case, right over here in this area, just down from the Alpha Bravo corner, they likely would have seen a pretty good heat signature because the fire does break out there in a little bit. And given the, they may have looked at this on the front end as they were pulling up before the officer get out of the rig and said, we're gonna stretch an attack line on side Alpha for fire control, as their initial plan that, we need to get a hose line off. The front door is right there. It provide access to the building. But I suspect that once the officer had done the 360, they would probably make some adjustments to that and indicate that they were going to deploy a fog nail on side Bravo and get a fog nail in through the side of the house and start to get some cooling water into that space where the bulk of the fire was located.
I mean, if we would, by that initial check, see that, well, we got heat signature on Bravo side, we got obviously lots of smoke, a little bit turbulent smoke coming from the attic. If we get a heat signature on B side, we got maybe even the confirmation that the owner said there's a hole in the floor on B side through the then we got a pretty good guess that it started in the crawl space, worked its way up through B side and in the room there and up into the attic. Then we know we got a fire in 3 places. Mm-hmm. And even if we have 1 + 4, 5 guys or something, going through the front door is just going to solve one of those 3 problems. Mm-hmm. At least initially. So you still want to have, you can do a lot more with a fog nail into that room in B side, another line operating into the crawl space, and maybe a third line or fog nail in that case up into the attic to start to buy yourself time. Mm-hmm. And it's just, to me, it's just poor resource management to put a whole group inside where they can only solve one of those problems. At least, well, I mean, not solve, because, I mean, the lines on the outside is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to delay it, but that's the only thing I want right now. I want to delay it until I can get more resources.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the thing with a really lightly staffed engine as the first company on arrival, even with persons reported, they don't have enough people to legally go to work. Yeah. As far as going inside and trying to do anything about that. So it's what can they do to slow things down, to buy some time, to get that next company in there, so that we now have 5 people, like a Swedish engine company. Yeah. In a sense, this is kind of like in the Swedish context, where some of the villages have a little small fire engine that goes with a few people, and then the larger fire engine comes from the bigger town. So, I think that our tactical approach to this would be very similar. First fog nail into the area that appears to have the highest heat signature, probably in through that Bravo side. Would be looking to see, can we get into the crawl space, or is it it could very well be a poured foundation
Yeah.
all the way around the house, and not have a bunch of openings. But if there was openings, or we could do that, then maybe another there, and a third into the attic space.
So interesting question. Let's say you maybe, let's say it's a clear indication. You see it through the window. There's a fire inside the room on Bravo side, and you think that's the problem. I mean, let's change the scenario to this one being occupied, or at least nobody says otherwise. It's early morning.
Mm-hmm.
You arrive with two people. Could you, in that case, make a kind of a bet? You punch a fog nail through B side to get some water on that fire. That's a pretty fast approach. While the other firefighters start laying out the hose line on A side. You put a fan in place. You break a window on C side, just randomly, or if you can in B side in the fire compartment. If they're in this case we said we saw the fire, so there's a window there. You break a window there. You put the fan on. Hope the fire hasn't extended, and then if you get with the fan and the fog nail in place, you get some kind of lift and you get some visibility inside. Would you be able to go inside with only two people and nobody on the outside?
Not legally.
Yeah. So I mean, that would be stretching it too far.
Well, if we were to do that, and it came to the attention of our occupational safety and health regulators, they would fine us for that.
Yeah.
Again, I think that, and we've had some conversations about this as other agencies. In fact, there was an agency in our state that recently was fined because they showed up with two people, and they went inside and they rescued a guy. Positive outcome, and they were fined. And so there's been considerable debate about that, about what they did, and the fact that whether or not they should have been fined, and so forth, and the like. I mean, the regulation is quite clear in many respects. But again, there's a conflict between the moral action and the action that's in compliance with the regulation. In this case, they could hear the guy. The guy was hollering, "Get me out of here." That's different than the house might be occupied. So I would say that. It really would depend on assessment of conditions, and we're not supposed to make entry into an immediately dangerous to life and health environment. So if the fire was knocked down by the application of water, and you cleared smoke with the fan, and you determined it no longer presented an immediately dangerous to life and health environment, then you might be able to do that. Just like if you showed up and it was a little fire in a wastebasket, yes, you could go inside and put it out. Three people.
So it matter really about if it's an incipient fire, it's okay, meaning it's a small trash can.
Yep.
But if you, by water application, in this case a fog nail, a stream through a window, whatever, if you knock the fire down so that it's once again basically at incipient stage, would it be okay? Or is the fact that it's gone beyond incipient, it doesn't really matter if it's gone back again, now it's suddenly not okay?
No, I would make the argument that if you had returned it to a non-ideal age state by application of water and ventilation, that it would be acceptable.
Because we don't have. I think the problem is the definition of incipient stage, and if there's no.
Thing. It's a made up thing.
Yeah, because if there's no clear verification. I mean, the Swedish law is also it says it's not focused on the fire itself. It's focused on the smoke.
Hmm.
It's if it's thick fire smoke, you can't go inside
Yep.
unless you're a full crew of 5. But if it's non-thick smoke, it doesn't matter how much is burning, you can go inside. I mean, that's what the law says, and then you have to make a risk assessment and so on, so that
Yep.
it's up to the officer to decide go no go.
I would.
But you could then easier say that, well, if you've gone from a fire, knocked it back down with water from the outside, put a fan on, and now you see the walls and ceiling further into the house, and you easily make the case that this is not thick smoke anymore. Then you could go inside potentially alone, if you liked.
Well, see, we have two parts to that. One of them is that you're not supposed to work by yourself. It's supposed to be 2 or more.
Yeah.
And then the other part is having people outside. So with a engine that's only got 2 people on it, it really presents a little bit greater challenge than if you had 3, for example. 3 absent persons reported in our state. With 3 people, you still can't go inside. You would need to have at least 4. And because it would be 2 inside, a crew of 2 people working together inside, and then 2 outside to provide them assistance if they get in trouble. Where with 2 people, now it's if you went inside, it's 2 people inside. There's nobody outside. And whether that be nobody running a pump or nobody monitoring conditions or whatever it might be. So there's a bit more of a challenge if you show up only with 2 people. But again, if it was just a trash can fire, you could take the water extinguisher and go inside and put it out. If you changed conditions and you put it back to essentially the same place, I suspect that there would probably be some argument about it with the regulators. But again, if you change conditions and you put them back to one that did not present an immediate threat to the firefighters going in there, then I would probably make the argument that that's okay.
Do you like the 2 in 2 out rule?
Not particularly.
Because it is just like our smoke diving leader and so on. It is a reactive limitation.
Well, I think there's a lot of complexity that surrounds the origin of where did that come from and so forth. But if we look at what level of resources it takes to solve the problem, if a firefighter gets jammed up inside the building, generally 2 people is not going to solve the problem. And
no, especially not when they're inside. Especially not when they are outside.
Yeah. And when we look at how maydays get resolved, that more often than not, people get themselves out of trouble, or other members of their company help them get out of trouble, or other people that are working nearby get them out of trouble. And a very small percentage is people that are outside coming in that get them out of trouble. And again, I think that while having additional resources available to either respond to assist a crew that's inside or take another assignment and so forth, as we use the on deck company, I think that's a very good thing. But when you show up initially, it may have a better positive outcome if you were able to simply address the problem and put the fire out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, at some point it makes a lot of sense that people on the outside, like when the fire progresses a little bit more from incipient, well, it's probably good to do door control at some point or another, and that usually requires a person, at least initially, unless you place a door curtain or something.
Yep.
And then, of course, when the fire progresses, it's really beneficial to have someone on the outside reading conditions. Is this improving or what? Is something happening beyond the firefighters, what they can know inside and so on? It's of course good to have someone who helps with the hose line on the outside for advancing that hose line and helping with pump issues and all. But it is early on a lot of fires, especially small fires, that could be very the need for speed is very important, both for life safety, but also for stopping the fire quickly. It is a limitation. And I'm not sure. I mean, at some point it becomes a stupid limitation, meaning that it's sure it's you get more manpower, but maybe the fire has grown too big, so now that becomes a bigger problem anyway than it would if we've gone inside with few people a couple of minutes ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the bottom line is. It's the same problem where, you know, like, well, Joey was stupid. He made something stupid, so nobody can go inside anymore without having a big crew. Is it a systemic error, or was Joey just individually not trained, or was Joey not fit to be inside in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really sure, but I struggle back and forth about what is then an appropriate level of systemic safety, meaning regulations, and what is an appropriate level of individual safety, meaning you can make that decision yourself.
Well, I guess the question in some respects, you know, I think the designing the system to provide for the safety of people doing the work and redundancy and so forth is a good thing on one level. But I think the question is does it really make it safer, or is it an illusion?
Well, the RIT teams, I mean, we're getting out a little bit from topic here, but RIT teams is highly questionable if they do supply you with any added safety compared to having those people inside addressing the problem, being closer to whatever problem arises and so on.
Well, then that's a big difference between and we don't assign a rapid intervention team as such. Within a blue card system, we use on deck companies, and they could be assigned to provide rapid intervention, or they could be assigned to stretch another line, or they could be assigned to, you know, or relief companies that need to come out to manage their air.
But they're a relief company, so that's a whole different game. They're not dedicated to RIT.
Whole different thing.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess it's the same thing with this initial operation. Is safety more? Is there more of a positive impact on the safety of everybody, and that includes any potential occupants as well as the firefighters, if we can quickly get a line on the fire, as opposed to we're gonna stand and wait because we don't have two people to leave outside. You know, I
would argue that in most of the case that would be the case. But again, that takes well. That said, you have to have, well, not have to, but I say it would be a strong argument to having somebody on the outside reading fire gases, you know, looking at exterior conditions, everything from roof sag to fire behavior changing, or somebody on the outside coming screaming, "Hey, I live here. I have vital information." Yep. Having someone on the outside is important, but not dedicated for just running inside when something happens.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
So there is this yeah, I've heard at least my main concern is early in the incident, like when every department in the world is resource weak. Like there's no part of the world where you have 20 people at the first minute. It's just
somebody gets there first.
Somebody gets there first, and they have to do something. And in that case, if you have to leave some people behind for where it apparently in that situation does nothing of value compared to everybody being inside. Like if there's
there's a big difference depending upon the nature of the operational environment, because if you're in an urban environment that's fairly heavily resourced, it could be that by the time the first company stretches a line to the door, there's another company that's
Yeah.
arrived on
No,
scene.
absolutely.
So in those contexts, that becomes less of an issue. They just count on the fact that those other resources are arriving, and it flows much more quickly.
Yeah.
In a rural environment where maybe that next company is going to be 2, 3, 5 minutes before they arrive, then it's a much more complicated problem when you're right on the margin of having enough people to do what needs to be done. And again, I think back to instances prior to 2 in, 2 out, where 2 people or 3 people did a significant amount of work that positively impacted the outcome of the incident. And again, I think it's cases where how can we engineer the system in such a way that we can prevent you from doing stupid things. And I'm not sure that keeping 2 people outside prevents you from doing stupid things, nor does it provide you with an adequate amount of resources to solve problems if you do stupid things.
Have I told you about the Swedish fire engine and fire company that went to Russia to train?
No.
So there's a fire department who was involved in like this Baltic Sea training with companies from Russia and Finland, and so I guess it's more of a political thing. But it's they do joint exercise every year. It's a big, I guess, political thing. But anyway, so the Swedish company, and I'm not sure I've done it entirely justice, but I'll try. The Swedish company went over to Russia. The incident was going to be a terrorist attack or a fire in a hotel. I don't remember what it was, but they didn't get much more information than that. And they actually started with just a loud explosion. I mean, they said loud. They blew windows out of that hotel structure. And they would go like, whoa. And then they went inside. So they were assigned to a floor of that hotel. And they started by Swedish method, always having a hose line. It was dark. It was smoke in the hallway. And they advanced going through and checking all the hotel rooms after, victims. And after a while, they were starting having Russian firefighters running around basically, where they were. And they were taking out real victims from the hotel, and there was smoke and fire in that hotel. So apparently there was live people inside those hotels. They have never got that information, and there was fire. So it wasn't just play fire. It wasn't just smoke. Yeah. It was real fire. So the Russians, and afterwards they told like the Swedish company was so slow, so they had to start taking people out because they hadn't anticipated the Swedes being so slow. And that company is good. I mean, I think they're a very progressive fire department by our standards. But our system is slow in a sense that the Russians just run around. They didn't bring hose lines. They don't work teams in that case. They just ran into the building, just check every window, every floor. You take that floor, you take that one, and they just ran. But the Swedish system was you have to drag a hose line, you have to take that with you, and you have to have 1 person outside and 2 persons and a team, and you have to check every room systematically, which is a very slow progress in that situation. And then it becomes a problem. The question is pretty obvious, like where is the line between a systematic regulatory approach to safety versus, from the Russians, heavily dependent on the individuals to make their own risk assessment of, well, don't run into places you can't run out of, which is like truck companies in the United States. They are they're very heavily dependent on the truck companies making their own risk assessment as to where do they go or not, or they may have put in place that you can't search in front of the hose line, for instance, to make some kind of limitation to where the truck company can and cannot be. And to me, it's just an interesting one. What is the appropriate answer? I don't know.
Yeah, I know that we've had similar debates around vent or isolate and search, which typically would not involve taking a hose line inside, and that would, if we were to use that tactic based on being told there's a person in that room, or the person is in the window and then they collapse inside the window and you go into to effect a rescue, that would be an instance where you might be operating inside and not have a hose line. But again, dependent upon a risk assessment by the individuals that are performing that tactic. So I think there's a number of interesting things with that are, again, in part dependent on context. If you're operating that way, is there somebody getting water onto the fire? If there's already a company that's dealing with the fire, that may be a very different circumstance than ours, where you show up and there's 2, 3, or 4 people, and there's not anybody else. So there's not somebody else to stretch a hose line. So you kind of have to take it with you regardless, because there's not somebody else dealing with that. So I think it is an interesting challenge when you start to look at how do we provide for the safety of the firefighters, and how do we also address the fact that if there's occupants in the building, they're at risk and they're less protected than us. If we're fortunate, they're behind a closed door separating them from the fire, but absent that, they really have no other protection. So they are at greater risk. So if we need to deal with that. Where is that line? And I think that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and it has to be a variable one, because it really is. Have you trained, and do you trust that training of your firefighters enough to make them make a lot of decisions themselves? Or do you want to put in place redundancy, or what do you call it, a robust system where there's multiple ways that has to be failed before you get somebody injured? Like, well, I don't trust our firefighters to make the risk assessment about where to go or not go inside the house in relationship to where you have protection of a hose line. So you cannot go inside without a hose line, and so on. So those questions, and Sweden took an approach that, well, again, Joey was stupid, so nobody gets to go inside without a hose line, ever, and so on. So it was from a safety perspective, it makes total sense to me, because it's a redundant system. It's a, for most part, but from an efficiency standpoint, it is a limitation. I mean, it is a limitation to have a hose line with you, especially if we're taking those kinds of incidents like we talked about, like a hotel. I mean, for an apartment and so on, it doesn't really matter, because you're gonna have to fight the fire also. So you need to bring a hose line to get some water on it, and then you can start ventilating. It's not a big penalty. But when you get to those kind of incidents, like a hotel or an office or something like that, it is a serious limitations to bring a hose line in terms of efficiency. And there's nobody in Sweden that has challenged our system within the last 30 years, I guess, on that point. And I'm not sure I would do it either, but it is it's not talked about that much or at all, which is I think the conversation that you need to have.
I think there's the other piece that kind of goes along with that is there's various degrees of working without a hose line.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not black and white. No.
I think that working without a hose line, as in there's nobody putting water on the fire and you're just simply going to go inside and try and effect a rescue, counting on the fact that you will be faster than the fire, or that you can isolate the fire with a door, or whatever it might be. That's one sort of risk. And then the other part of it is that somebody does have a hose line on the fire, and you're working in an adjacent area, or there's a hose line deployed to your area of operation, but you don't happen to have it in your hands, but you're doing work in that area, and the line is between you and the fire. I mean, so there's a lot of variability with that, and again, I think that that some of that is context dependent on how many resources do you have. If you're in a context like ours, where on a good day, you show up and you have 6 people to do the initial stages of the operation, not the first company, but the first couple of companies, then it may be very, very different than if you have more ample resources.
Absolutely. Just let's get back to the video. Let's talk a little bit about fire behavior before I need to go.
Sure. So let's see what happens with this as we go along.
I mean, you can look at the speed of the smoke and so on, and I think that's one of the most crucial elements, the temperature. And we can see that the smoke coming from the right side appears to be a little bit more lacy. It's thinner.
Yep.
And then on the left side seems to be a little bit more turbulent, a little bit more buoyant. Volume is also, but that could be a angle issue. But it seems to be like the hotter it is, the more problem it usually means, and it usually means that you're closest to the fire. It doesn't have to be, but closer usually.
Yeah, and as this goes along, the camera moves around a little bit, and we get a little bit different view. The video indicates that they were, at this point, they were told that there's no floor, which I
could it be that it's on a renovation, that it's been like actually
no,
removed?
it was an occupied house.
Yeah.
And the thing that puzzles me, I think that's that maybe there was some information that was given to them, or maybe they saw something from in there, but it's obvious that they didn't move at all inside the door. They didn't reach inside the door with the tools to check. When they do open up the front door, we can notice that there is a significant difference in velocity of smoke.
I mean, it could be a coincidence, but it's probably not. That when they open the door, you get 30 seconds later, you get a substantial increase in combustion rate in that room.
Yeah, I really think that's likely.
Oh yeah, I mean it would be the problem. I mean, I'm not saying it could be that you just developed that time, but it's very unlikely. So that probably gave the fire that extra it needed. But now it's darkened down again. And I didn't think about the connection to they're spraying water, so it could be from the secondary effect of spraying water out in the hallway that they get that suppression, or it's gone down to ventilation controlled again.
Sure. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is watching what's going on in this area here, where this window is, where before you pretty much had smoke from the eaves, and now you get a little bit of smoke coming out from around the window frame. The other thing you see is that this house has plastic covered soffits, or vinyl covered soffits, and those have begun to melt out. And then as we
got some nice ignitions there in the smoke. Yeah,
this begins. Window broke, and pretty soon we're gonna start to get some significant flaming coming out of that window.
And that's the moment where you as an officer would go like, yeah, move that line from A side to B side because you're going to be much more effective at controlling that fire from B side.
And one
Unless
of
you,
the
unless they report they got a fire in the hallway and
yeah,
deeper into the house.
and one of the things in looking at this, and again, there's no way to know exactly from looking at the video, but looking at the layout of this, where you've got a big window, picture window here in the front, that's probably a living room, and then you have double windows here. It's not that far back, but this is not an extremely large house, so it's possible that that this is a living room, and then there's a dining area which is separated by, at least in part, by a wall from the living room. So that could be why their stream is not having a big effect. They were also directing their stream up towards the ceiling with a straight stream. Now, what I don't know is what they saw inside there. Was there some evidence that the ceiling had failed and there was fire burning in the attic? But again, application of water from the doorway is only going to impact a very small amount of that attic space.
Can you go back to where they just opened the door again and watch it from there again?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can see differences between the door opening and the window opening on the smoke, both in terms of velocity but also in volume, and see if the volume when they start applying water in the door in the door, if it seemed to be decreasing. If
They just started applying water. I mean, you're not getting a real significant color change in the smoke. It's still
see there when they start applying up. I mean, why would they have that angle if there has to be a high ceiling in there?
Well, either a high ceiling or maybe there's some failure of the ceiling, which again I'm not 100% convinced of. I don't know.
It has to be because otherwise they wouldn't have used that steep angle. Or I mean, that was just a guess. I mean, we could second guess that all day, but it's interesting. I mean, looking at the difference between that window and the other, there's pretty clearly a difference that those windows are not in the same room unless they are vastly differently windows, which would be unlikely. That the closest window would be much more, better sealed. So I would just assume that those two are two separate rooms, and that's where then they can't from that angle, if that is a wall between, they can't do basically nothing to impact on that room where their hose line is placed right now.
Well, you see that they get the smoke lightens up at the top of the doorway, but it's increasing in velocity towards the back and towards that Bravo Charlie corner. It started to darken up quite a bit coming out of the eaves. And when the camera moves around, we can see that the fire's burning up high in that space. Quite probably has substantively extended into the attic.
That's pretty much almost a fuel controlled fire. Almost that's burning inside.
Now, again, one of the things with this, when we think about this from a tactics or a water application perspective, if we were operating from the outside, application of water through this first floor window, again, if the ceiling is gone in that room, you kind of lose the effect of the steep angle off the ceiling and distributing water through that space. But to come up to that window and make an indirect attack while somebody pulls the soffits along that side of the eave, and then to make an eve attack along that side of the house, probably we would have had a significant impact on that fire in the attic. I know in
Absolutely.
the UL attic fire study that was highly effective, whether there was ventilation or no ventilation in that attic space, because it wet the surfaces of the fuel, the underside of the roof and the trusses. So
Yeah, I totally agree.
they
Yeah, you
eventually
can
move
you
around.
almost see that it looks like it is like a it looks like it's a door further in. You can see
Yeah,
see
back over
doors
here.
burning further in. That would indicate that it is a separate room. But anyway, again, they can't do anything with the hose line from that perspective unless there's fire extension. We don't know that, so maybe they're fighting a fire that's extended further in. But they can't. Again, you can't just. You have to take every. The problem with firefighting is a lot of times that if you have fire in multiple compartments, you almost have to extinguish those compartments at the same time. Like you can't start with one compartment, then transition to the next compartment. You almost have to do them all at the same time, which is practically hard.
And one of the things, I mean, if you go back a little bit in this, they're applying some water at the eaves, but not along the entire length of the eaves, and it didn't appear that they had pulled the soffits in that particular instance, and it was having no effect on the fire that was below the attic that was driving the whole thing. They kind of have to kill the engine at
Oh yeah.
at the lowest level in order to have that effect.
I mean, like you said, I'm not against them doing. Let's say they do an Eve attack from the other side. I'm not against that at all. I'm not against them placing a fog nail in the attic. It would slow it down and so on. Like you said, you have to kill the engine first, or at least at the same time, because otherwise you're just delaying the inevitable.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're pulling a line to B side there. It also seems that they're raising an attic, a ladder. I guess they're gonna cut a hole, because
Yep.
I don't think, and that's just gonna make it worse, I would guess.
Well, they eventually they cut a hole up there to apply water into the attic through the gable end, which is
It's
what
not a
we
good
found
idea.
less effective than it could be.
And well, you're applying oxygen to the entire attic, but only water to partial of it,
Yep.
and that's usually the problem. You don't want you can't win by doing that. Um, no, but so this again going back to, I think I've previously said the fire behavior is hard. It's not. The buildings are hard in the sense that if you can identify which volumes have fire, in this case early on, maybe it's the crawl space, maybe it's that one room on B side, and maybe it's the attic. You got 3 volumes of fire, and you have to get water into it. Doesn't really matter to that much extent how you get water into those, what tool and so on. But if you get water into all those 3 volumes, you are probably going to delay it at least, meaning that you're buying yourself time to get into those volumes and actually extinguish. But the first part is identifying which of the volumes that have fire, and if you identify 2 out of 3 and you get water in 2 out of 3, you're still going to lose. And I think that it's and that's why building construction is so important, to identify where are the volumes and how can I get water into those volumes, preferably by not letting oxygen in.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that when we look at this application of water at the window, I mean they're putting water into the fire compartment, but the water's not getting onto the burning fuel.
Yeah.
Water doesn't go around corners, and I think that's
While water in steam form.
Well, that does go around corners, but water in liquid form doesn't go around.
Liquid water doesn't go around corners, yes, unless it goes to gas and then condenses back to liquid around the corner. Technically, yeah. Well,
it has to sneak. But I think that's part of the thing, that we talk about with our guys quite a bit is what effect is your application of water having? If you're applying water and the fire is continuing to do the same thing, you are either in the wrong place or you don't have enough flow rate, which is generally not the case.
Yes.
So as you and I have talked about before, generally a distribution problem, not a flow rate problem.
Generally.
And then the question comes down to, is there a way for me to put the water where it needs to be? You know, again, the nozzle operator is back from the window. It doesn't have a breathing apparatus on. You know, if they did and they were able to move up to the window and move that line so that they were able to apply water to the left and the right of the window, maybe they would have a different effect.
I would say that if you're in a residential environment, meaning those type of volumes, if you haven't had a big effect on the fire within 5 seconds of water applications,
You're in the wrong place.
You're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even matter what tool it is, you're doing something wrong. If you're using a fog nail, you haven't had effect, you're not inside the room. You're inside with the fog nail in a closet.
Yep.
If you're doing a straight stream, your angle is not good. Your direction is not good. You don't find the deflection that's good on the surface to deflect the water and so on. It's like 5 seconds and you have your unless you're using water as a steam, meaning that you want an inert environment. That is a little bit different because it could take 30 seconds to maybe get enough steam. Not in a residential, you would still get maybe 15 seconds. So I would stretch it to 15 seconds in that case. That if you haven't had an effect in that case, you're doing something wrong.
It's still a pretty short period of time.
Oh yeah, it's very short. I mean, you can flow water in that direction there. Where the stream hits, it's gonna be cooled. Like you don't have to flow more than 1 second every time, in every position. And to have a portable monitor go inside that room, that's almost hilarious. Sorry, that's just that's just hilarious. There's no other word for that. I would love to have portable monitors, but that would be for commercial structures. You want to throw the water very far inside.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things with this, and again, another good point of discussion for our guys is what is the strategy? Is it offensive or defensive? And if it's defensive, then they've basically written it off, and they're just trying to get the fire to go out. And if it's offensive, then that's a whole different kettle of fish. But you know, they're operating from the outside, but it's not clear. And again, video is just a video, but it's not clear, is their intent at the end of the day to go inside and finish putting this out, that the structure is still sufficiently sound to allow them to do that, in which case they're operating offensively from the exterior, or have they made a shift to a defensive strategy, in which case anything that they're doing up close and personal to the building is simply placing them at risk for some burned up wood.
Yeah. And that is of course, and I'm a big supporter of actually putting fire outs, even if they tore the building down. At the least, you get training, which is hard to come by these days. So at least you get training. But there's so much about, like, with the investigation of possible crimes and so on that you need to extinguish. So I'm a big supporter of actually extinguishing buildings, even though they get torn down afterwards. I think that's correct, given the benefits and problems. But
and again, looking at this house at this point in time, I would not be concerned that it was going to fall down in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
No, absolutely. That's a work. That's I mean, you can't see real behind that, but I wouldn't anticipate the roof being be able to collapse January yet. But they were like that portable monitor in that window. I mean, that's just,
It's not having an effect.
No, it's having none effect. I mean that room they're putting the water in, they would never flash because you're hitting some walls in there, and there's creating. But again, you could achieve the same effect with a garden hose basically in that room. I'm absolutely sure. And if of course on a hand line, you just have to put 5 seconds of water there, and you can apply it from the next window. You can alternate between those windows. And I'm not saying go like, well, we have water, it's cheap. Well, yes, but it takes time to deploy a big hose line and so on. It's still resource management. The less resources you can come by, the better it is. Maybe you have a limited hydrant system. If you put a big ground monitor there, you're going to struggle with maybe other lines of getting enough water and so on. I'm never for resource wastefulness, even if they have resources. Because at some point you will, maybe in that not that incident, somewhere other incident, you will lack resources, and then you're used to working resource with a lot of resources. So I still think you should be cautious about using and not wasting resources, anything from water to equipment and so on. But this is
people, and people. I mean, one of the things that strikes me with this video is it reminds me of a number of jobs I went to early in my career where we worked very, very hard, and we did absolutely nothing to change the outcome of the incident. And in this case, these guys are working very, very hard, and I suspect they're trying to do the best they can with what they have and what they know, but it's not having a significant impact on the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, I get frustrated of the flow issue. I get so annoyed because it's concealing the problem. That like sometimes you can muscle down the fire with added flow, but usually it's just covering up all the flaws in your extinguishing techniques. Because that monitor and that water cannon on the truck there, I guess it was a cannon on truck or monitor on truck. It's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to delay the inevitable since you can't access the surfaces. And here we go. It's picking up again, and that shouldn't be a big surprise. Because is that up? Have somebody cut a hole? Is that a burn through in the attic? I don't think they've had people in the attic, or have they?
No.
Is it a hole?
No, they're operating they're operating strictly from the outside.
Yeah. So it burned through the attic over there?
Yes, I believe that was, or like a attic vent or something.
I mean, if you put that's the thing. If you put a fog nail in there, don't make any holes and so on.
Yeah.
If you get a fog nail in there, it's gonna take hours and hours for it to burn through somewhere. Because you're making that space largely non-combustible.
Yeah, that was an attic vent for normal attic vent. It burned through around that.
Yeah, but that's like if you put a fog nail in there, you can maintain that for hours. And and it bothers me like when people make a big hole in the roof or vent it in different ways. Like opening up the door and there's a pathway up to the attic on the inside. Now you're basically ventilating the attic by having the door open. You're increasing the rate of combustion on the attic so much that you will have roof collapse. You will have burn-throughs and everything like that. And the connection between heat release rate and deterioration of building materials is like there's not a sign of it in the United States. Like there's no, I've never read anything on ventilation that says, well, if you increase the combustion rate on the attic with whatever you do, you increase the amount of wood that's being decomposed and you will have structural collapse sooner. It's like it's non-existent. And I don't get that.
Well, I would figure it's self-evident.
Well, I mean, it really isn't. It's not there. And you talk to people like, if the even the people who are against like vertical ventilation because of different reasons, even if like an attic on that one, even if people are that, it's not part of their like pros and cons. Like if you have a list of what's all the pros of making a hole in the attic, well, it's this and this and this. Make a con list. It's never part of the con list that you increase the rate of decomposition and then structural collapse and unplanned ventilation and so on will increase.
In the last place we worked, we discovered that generally with multi-story wood frame apartment buildings that get fires in the attic, if you made a hole in the roof, more often than not, the roof would go away. If instead of doing that, you introduce water into the attic space, then the roof would not go away, and that was a difficult concept for people to kind of get through their heads. And even when water was used in a defensive way, in a sense, not from a tactically defensive, not strategically defensive, where the truck company would drop a distributing nozzle between where the fire was in the attic and the unburned portion, the larger portion of the roof that was not involved. The fire would not go past that, and they would stop it where it was. But that was sort of an alien concept when we first started doing that. But it was very, very effective.
So before I go, this is if somebody's still listening, you're gonna go home and talk about that. You just build 3 doll houses. It can be simple doll houses. It doesn't have to be airtight and so on. You don't have to be. You can make a sloppy doll house. Three of them. So you make one. A normal dollhouse, single compartment dollhouse, with just one opening on the front, and you make 2, one with a vertical ventilation, so a hole on top, and 3 the same one with a vertical ventilation on top. So you have 2 ones with a little bit more ventilation, and you take a normal bathroom scale and you put the first dollhouse with not the vertical ventilation on. You put it on a bathroom scale. And you just burn it, let it free burn until it basically falls down, and you note how fast the weight of the box is reduced. Like how fast, because that's how much mass you're releasing.
Yeah.
And then you make the same one with the vertical ventilation also. So you have increased combustion rate, and you will see that the mass is lost faster. And then you make a third one where we have the increased ventilation, but you continuously suppress it with an air sprayer, so that it burns, but it burns poorly, and the steam goes out through the vertical vent. And then again, you look at how fast the mass is dropping of the box, and you would see drastically different results. You would see that the mass is the fastest mass loss is with the maximum ventilation and no water. The second fastest one is with less ventilation, the normal dollhouse with no water, and the least amount of weight loss is when you add water also. So you continue to suppress the fire and turn it to steam. I mean, it's very simple to show that if we increase combustion rate, mass is going to be reduced, and if we have lightweight construction, or for that matter other types of construction like steel, which directly correspond to how much energy you're pushing into the steel, how much energy you're pushing into the concrete, the more energy you put into it, the faster it's going to go to structural instability. Mm-hmm. So it's just a concept just an exercise to do to convince people. To show the downside of ventilation without water application. Mm-hmm. Sorry, we didn't have time to go further than that because I have an obligation.
Yeah, no worries.